So, the first thing that you really need to think about when you're working on an impact measurement strategy, including creating your theory of change, is figuring out who's going to be a part of your working group and making sure that you're really fostering a situation where you can have equitable participation among folks that have diverse points of view. So, if we really want to be specific about why this is important, first we need to acknowledge that default engagement typically perpetuates power discrepancies. So, we want to be very intentional about who is involved in any of our processes of creating a theory of change, creating an impact measurement strategy, etc. We also know that engaging more diverse perspectives tend to lead to better strategic thinking. So there's a real quality imperative to having the right people in the room and involved in creating our theory of change. And then finally, we know that if people are involved earlier on in the strategy setting process, they'll tend to be more bought in when it comes down to execution. So in this context, that means that if people are involved in creating our theory of change and our impact measurement strategy, they're more likely to then continue to be bought in to do the actual work of collecting, analyzing, and using data once we get to that point in the process. I want to share a few tools for how we can do this. The first tool is really considering the ladders of engagement. And so this is based on a resource that I gleaned from the National Health Service in England. Bain also has a framework called Rapid that is similar. And ultimately, it's important to really think about the different levels of engagement and power sharing within any kind of project, and creating an impact measurement strategy is no exception. So the very basic level is informing. So somebody can understand that this project is happening, but not really be involved. The second level is consulting. Maybe somebody is asked to give their opinion, to share a little bit about what they think about the particular situation, the outcomes that we're working towards, what have you. The next level up is having folks involved in the decision. So, folks who are consulted might only be asked to give their opinion. They're not asked to weigh in on a choice. Going the next level up asks people to be involved in making important decisions. And then finally, the highest level of engagement is co-creation, not only involvement in decision making, but really defining how we're progressing through the project at every stage. So when you're thinking about these levels of power sharing, there isn't really one right answer to who should be at each level, but we want to be intentional about who sits at these different levels and make sure that the right folks are involved in decision making and co-creation, etc. So one of the ways to do that is to really create what I call a stakeholder map, can be called a stakeholder matrix. And with this, you are really outlining different kinds of groups within your organization. So, I'm often working with small, medium-sized nonprofits. We typically have a leadership team, maybe we have a development team, we have a programs team, we have board members, we have volunteers, and maybe there's a few different groups of folks who are benefiting from the work that we do. And so you can think about having representatives from each of these different groups involved in different levels of your impact strategy project. So often there's a small team that's involved in co-creating your impact measurement strategy, and that might involve folks that represent a few of these different perspectives. And then you can go beyond that small group and consult, inform, and maybe even involve in decision some of these other groups or individual representatives from some of these other groups. So I'm sharing this framework for you to think, okay, what are the different groups that should be represented in our process and what level of engagement ought they to have? I'll share a template for this stakeholder map here at the end of this video. Recommendation: when you're working on your impact measurement strategy and you're starting with creating your theory of change, you want a diverse team of 4 to 7 individuals working together on this theory of change. Who should be a part of that group? Generally, I think that it's helpful to involve clients or service participants in some way. And so if you have staff members who represent that point of experience on your team, ideally have one of those people involved in your design team. In addition, you'll probably want to consult with some clients or service participants before the process starts and maybe share a draft and talk them through with that. Of course, depending on who your organization serves. If you're an organization that's serving preschoolers, you might not talk your theory of change through with the preschoolers, but maybe there's a parent that you can engage, for example. So your theory of change design team may have a board member or a few board members. It shouldn't be dominated by the board, but the rest of your board should be engaged in reviewing a final draft, providing feedback later on in the process. So they should certainly be informed early on and then be consulted at some point before the thing is called final. So if you have other besides those who are participating on your design team, you may want to give them the opportunity to provide feedback in either one-on-one or existing group meetings. So consider how you're going to engage your staff. Certainly there will be staff on your design team, but there may be others. How do you want to engage them? And then finally, key partners or volunteers. You may have a few partners or volunteers that you want to engage in, just reviewing a draft along the way. Potentially, you could even have a close partner involved in your design team. Depends on the nature of your relationship. But ultimately, I find a diverse team of 4 to 7 individuals can be a really good starting place working together to create your theory of change, define your learning agenda, start drafting out your performance indicators. We know if we're doing this right. We want to make sure that at the minimum, we have some kind of diverse team. It's not just one person designing our theory of change and telling everybody else, here it is. You want to make sure that this thing is tested with your internal team, that people have had a chance to say, yeah, this squares with my experience, or no, it doesn't, before calling it final. If you're doing this even better, you're engaging beneficiaries, partners in the process, you're testing your theory of change, you're testing your drafts along the way. And based on that testing, you know that other people get it, that people understand and are supportive of your approach. So I can share more of this grading rubric after this video as well. Wanted to talk a little bit about how you facilitate a theory of change design session. So you've got a team. You want to make sure that these sessions are organized in a way that is effective. And it's important to think about these meetings as maybe an opportunity for a team to work together anew, because if you've got a diverse team, you probably are not all used to working together in the same space. So you need to really reestablish some norms, some processes for how we're going to collaborate. Don't assume that everybody's going to be immediately on the same page if it's a team that doesn't work together all the time. So, some of the basics like have an agenda, encourage some connection, provide space for individual brainstorming. A big piece of this is that, we'll probably acknowledge there are some power dynamics. If you have the executive director, some board members present, that might feel intimidating to some of your staff members or folks who don't often interface with those individuals. Depends on the nature of your organization, your culture, but you want to really acknowledge and be sure to navigate some of those power dynamics. So things that you might want to avoid. Don't be distracted. Give this the time it's due. Don't dismiss or poo-poo concerns about the process. Don't allow certain people to monopolize the conversation, because if you do have a group process, you want to really make sure that you are pulling out everybody's voice. So, I love providing space for some individual brainstorming and really, figuring out ways to time box certain parts of the conversation so that certain topics and individuals get the space that they're due. Accept vague language or jargon. Don't accept fuzzy thinking in this process. You want to really encourage folks to be critical. And you also want to find space to celebrate progress. So each step that you're making along this journey of creating a theory of change, creating a learning agenda, celebrate your accomplishment, because it is a major accomplishment. It takes a lot of work to get here. And you know that you've got a lot of other things on your plate if you're deciding to do this. Make sure that you're really giving folks the opportunity to step back and see how much they have accomplished. So I mentioned really helpful to give folks some space for individual brainstorming. Here's how I often like to do it. Often like to start off with maybe 5 minutes, give people some sticky notes, pose a question to them, ask them to write one idea per sticky note, put that on your whiteboard. If you're in a virtual space, you can use a Google Jamboard, you can use a Miro board or any other virtual collaboration tool to be the platform for this. So give people just a few minutes to get all of their own personal ideas out there, get that in writing, get that in a public place. Then spend some time grouping together some of these like concepts. Maybe this is 10 minutes, and you can give each person a turn in really grouping some of these concepts together. I often like to make it challenging by saying, okay, we're going to do 3 rounds. Each round is going to be 60 to 90 seconds. And each person needs to come up with groups or themes among all of these ideas. Then maybe the final person, the final round is actually naming those groups, deciding what each of these sort of themes, if you will, are. And then the final step often is prioritizing concepts. So we've gone through, we have a lot of ideas out there. You can use dot voting, you can use a matrix. Either one of those allow you to give people the opportunity to say, here are the concepts that are most important, and here's why. So you want to make sure to give folks some time to give you a sense of the relative priority of concepts before you get out of the brainstorming phase. So here's the stakeholder map template I mentioned. Sure to share this and other resources in the notes and in this course. So thank you again for your time. We will be moving on from here and actually getting into the meat of creating your theory of change as the first asset of your impact measurement strategy. But before we get into any of that, just want to remind you and encourage you, think about who should be a part of this process. Really be intentional with this, and then the rest of this will all go more smooth. Thanks again.